Sir? Sorry to disturb you, sir, but we've picked up an unidentified bogey. I think you should see the replay for yourself.
About other aircraft in the area or missile testing?
Sir, no known aircraft can maneuver like this.
Code Indigo Delta Echo 9er. A confirmed fallen angel in Sector 87. Mobilize Operation Falcon immediately.
This is David Brinkley in the radar room at Washington National Airport. On these radar screens last Saturday, they saw something strange and unusual and at the moment unexplainable. It was not an airplane, it was not a cloud, nobody knows what it was.
Oh yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military, and they never were able to make me a concrete report on it. There's always things like that going on, flying saucers.
Do you believe in aliens? Extraterrestrial beings? For those of us who read the Bible, it's clear. Extraterrestrial beings not only exist, but they've been here since the very beginning, since before the earth was made. Quote, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone when all the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" End quote. What this verse is saying is that when the earth was created, there was a race of beings called morning stars, or sons of God, who sang together and shouted for joy after God created it. Quote, "We may deduce two logical conclusions from these verses. First, that they are not referring to literal stars, but the sentient sons of God. And second, that these sons of God are older than the earth itself, since they were present to witness the primordial foundation." The motif of the morning stars in biblical parlance is meant to convey pre-existence and preeminence. In John's Revelation, Jesus declares, quote, "I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright and morning star." While writing to the brethren in Colossae, Paul affirms the preeminence of Christ, quote, "He is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he may have the preeminence." As the firstborn, not only from the dead, but over all creation, Jesus is the original morning star and the preeminent Son of God. The morning stars and sons of God are children of dawn, the second born in the family of God. They represent an elder race of beings that are both pre-existent and preeminent in relationship to all others, save the Son of God himself, the first and foremost over all creation. End quote. An elder race of beings, otherwise known as angels. They were there to witness God creating the earth, and by their very definition, they're extraterrestrials. Now, we know that angels can look like people. There are instances all throughout the Bible that prove this point, the most famous one being in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Quote, "Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware." So angels can look like humans, act like humans, sound like humans, and pretend to be humans, but deep down, they are far from human. Let's not forget that Lucifer himself is an angel.
What? Lucifer is an angel, a fallen angel.
December 8th, 2020. The Jerusalem Post releases an article entitled, quote, "Former Israeli space security chief says aliens exist. Humanity is not ready." Let's read it together and see what we can find. Every time this article says the word alien, I'm going to replace it with fallen angel, because that's exactly what they are. Quote, "This galactic federation has supposedly been in contact with Israel and the US for years, but are keeping themselves a secret to prevent hysteria until humanity is ready." This article is by Aaron Reich, December 8th, 2020. Has the state of Israel made contact with fallen angels? According to retired Israeli general and current professor Hayam Eshid, the answer is yes, but this has been kept a secret because, quote, "humanity isn't ready." Speaking in an interview, Eshid, who served as head of Israel's space security program for nearly 30 years and is a 3-time recipient of the Israeli Security Award, explained that Israel and the US have both been dealing with fallen angels for years, with Eshid clarifying the existence of a, quote, "galactic federation." The Galactic Federation. In New Age theology, there is a group of so-called, quote, "good aliens" who call themselves the Galactic Federation of Light, or the Ashtar Command. They've been making contact with psychics and channelers for decades now, and their message is always the same. It's in direct opposition to the gospel of Jesus Christ. You see, it's the same exact lie Lucifer told Eve in the Garden of Eden. It's their calling card, and they always resort back to this promise of, ye shall be as gods.
The angels, the sons of God, resemble who we call in ufology the Nordics or the Pleiadians, who are these beings who very much look like us. The misconception is that the fallen angels have a different appearance than the good angels. The bad guys look different than the good guys. The good guys are these beautiful angelic beings, and the fallen angels are these grotesque, demonic-looking entities with horns, and they're the typical Hollywood depictions of demons. But that's ludicrous. That is completely illogical. These entities, these beings, hail from the same race. Every time that human beings encounter angelic beings within the biblical narrative, the description of the angels is always the same. They look like men. Indeed, Paul says that it's possible to entertain angels unawares, which means that you can confuse them for human beings. They're not human beings. They are, in fact, an extraterrestrial non-human race, a pre-existent extraterrestrial non-human race. But they are also sons of God, just like Adam was a son of God. And so it makes sense, therefore, that all the sons in the family bear the same semblance. They look the same, and they resemble their father. And it is my contention that both mankind and the elder race, the human race and the elder race, bear the image of God. There is no scripture in the Bible anywhere that states that mankind is the exclusive bearer of God's image. Rather, it just says that we were made in the image and likeness of the Elohim. And so we look like them because they are our elder siblings. We are reproductively compatible with them. So we are very similar, even physiologically, although they are of a higher nature. And so then the question is, what do they look like? And I think the answer is apparent within the canonized text of Scripture. They look like us, but with some differences. And we know that there has to be some differences because Lot was able to recognize them when they were approaching the city of Sodom. Lot saw two angels approaching and instantly was able to recognize that these were sons of God, emissaries from the kingdom of heaven. Now, how could he have recognized these angels? Because they looked human enough to where they could pass through town and be taken as exotic human beings, but they had distinctive trademarks, hallmarks that were calling cards that they were not human beings and that they were indeed angels.
So there's two people or two subjects that are in your backyard?
Correct, and they're very large. They're like 8 foot, 9 feet, 10 foot. I don't know. They look like aliens to us. Big eyes. They have big eyes, like I can't explain it, and big mouth. They're shiny eyes, and they're not human. They're 100% they're not human.
Not human, get it? Something non-human, but intelligent. A non-terrestrial intelligence.
There was an event that took place back in the late 40s known as the Babylon Working Ritual. Now, this was a ritual that was carried out by Jack Parsons, JPL. You know, people will even to this day say that JPL stands for Jack Parsons Laboratories, but on paper it's Jet Propulsion Laboratories. JPL is major. It's a historic, so much surrounding this, so much history here. Jack Parsons was not professionally trained, yet he was tapping into high technology and building rockets. How do you do that without any type of formal training? There were no rocket programs in America before Jack Parsons. This is paramount to understand. This guy was tapping into theosophy, thelema, Thelema, the religion of Aleister Crowley. He was a disciple of Aleister Crowley, and he was working with L. Ron Hubbard, who was the founder of Scientology. Interestingly, not only did L. Ron Hubbard start Scientology, but he was a science fiction writer. The movie Battlefield Earth with John Travolta, well, that was written by L. Ron Hubbard. Interestingly also, John Travolta is a Scientologist, right? Now, I mentioned this because this is a man who writes science fiction, yet he started a religion based on science fiction. There has to be something in there where he's getting these clues and these ideas. He's getting these from another realm.
From that point, they ripped a hole open into space-time. And from that point afterwards, you had, regardless of what Parsons actually successfully completed during that with the Whore of Babylon and different things. After that, you had the Roswell incident, you had the Kenneth Arnold sightings, you had in '53 there was the swarm of UFOs that flew over the White House. And so there's this unleashing of supernatural activity that took place after that ritual was performed.
Babylon working was successful, according to Jack Parsons. Matter of fact, Parsons said in his Antichrist Manifesto that they were successful and that a child was conceived in that act, and that there was a spirit known as Hilarion. The Whore of Babylon was what they were trying to bring about. They believed what we believe, and that America was the final Babylon. Like, this was the revived Babylon. They believed it, and they were occultists. We're Christians, and we believe it. There's evidence to back this up. But yes, let's backtrack just for a second. What happened was they opened up this portal, they created a rift, and entities began to come through. Not just this Whore of Babylon being birthed, but other entities, because people all over the place started having paranormal encounters, and they began to report this to law enforcement, report this to the FBI, report this to whatever agency they could get in touch with. And so the federal agencies said, we've got to come up with an answer for this. We were not prepared for any of this. There's UFO activity, there's talk of entities and demons and winged creatures and just all kinds of weird, just paranormal demonic activity following this ritual that Jack Parsons said finally worked. They did the ritual for a couple years. It finally worked, finally stuck. And that's what a scientist does. A scientist is going to work at something. He's going to work at that hypothesis until it's proven true or false.
Despite their apparent success, the partnership between Parsons and Hubbard soon soured, with Hubbard absconding with a boat and funds they had invested together. Parsons would face further professional and personal setbacks before his untimely death in a laboratory explosion in 1952. The ritual also underscores the blurred boundaries between science, religion, and magic in the mid-20th century. Both Parsons and Hubbard, each influential in their respective fields, were deeply enmeshed in occult practices, reflecting a broader societal fascination with the unknown.
It's delinquency. It's satanic.
Some kind of ritual, satanic in nature, I don't know.
Satanic ritual?
Oh, all the time.
Just as Parsons and Hubbard sought to channel otherworldly energies through their ritual, society at large became captivated by the notion of otherworldly visitors. Aleister Crowley, the foundational figure of Thelema and a significant influence on Parsons, once sketched a being he contacted during an earlier ritual named Lamb. The visage of Lamb bears an uncanny resemblance to modern depictions of grey aliens, with its oversized cranium and piercing almond-shaped eyes. Could magical rituals, like those of Crowley and later Parsons, serve as a bridge between dimensions or realities, possibly connecting to extraterrestrial realms?
Government testing, paranormal activity, interdimensional communications, you name it.
Perhaps Tabitha's summoning them to kill us all.
An alien invasion?
As we stand at the crossroads of science and spirit, perhaps we'll find that magic and mystery are, in fact, the very fabric of the cosmos. This is especially true for biblical theology. The book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verse 12, sums it up nicely. Quote, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." This is exactly what L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons were invoking that fateful night in the desert.
This was something that we heard about, and then we investigated during research for the book Exo Vaticana, which ultimately led us to the top of Mount Graham in Arizona. We were curious why. When the Vatican's Advanced Technology Telescope and the large binocular telescope were being built, why did the indigenous peoples of Arizona, especially the San Carlos Apaches, why did they join environmentalists in filing dozens of lawsuits before a federal appeals court to try to stop the construction of the observations on Mount Graham? The project ultimately prevailed in favor of the Vatican and NASA after an act by the United States Congress ordered it to be done. But the question remained in our mind, why had the tribal communities fought so diligently against the construction of telescopes atop that mountain? Now, I had wrongly assumed that this was because Mount Graham was a sacred place, as in preceding generations of Native Americans had lived and died on it, and therefore it was considered holy ground, something like a graveyard. But I learned later that while that was partially true, it really wasn't the big issue. The real dispute surrounded how Mount Graham is considered one of the 4 holiest mountains in the world for the Apache and is considered sacred to all of the region's native peoples, and it is so because it is what we might call a stargate. In their mythos, a portal through which the star people have come since the dawn of time. And once we understood that fact, our suspicions as to why the Vatican and NASA had chosen that mountain in particular, even being willing to face a prolonged legal battle to build these telescopes on Mount Graham, including the largest binocular telescope in the world where the Lucifer device is kept, why would they have gone to all of that trouble? Why not just go to another mountain range and find basically the same height, the same environmental conditions? Why did it have to be that mountain? Now we came to learn another thing, and that is that the San Carlos Apache have these preserved ancient tales concerning Mount Graham and that geography, including stories very similar to biblical chronology. These legends involve a creator, a deceiving dragon that follows, an epic flood, and even a race of giants known as the Jindupids, who were judged and destroyed by God. According to the legend, a race of Indians called the Tartans lived in the valley between Tucson and Phoenix. These were just peaceful farmers, and they prospered until one day they were invaded by the Jindupids, described as Goliaths, who were so huge they used tree limbs for toothpicks. Well, these Nephilim were led by this massive man they call Evil Ken, who allegedly came from the northeast and were headed south to their home beyond the Gulf of Baja. These giants nearly wiped out the Tartans before they ran and hid themselves underground and in the mountains and prayed to Father Sun, who then threw this huge fireball that came down to the earth, seared the monstrous Nephilim into the scorched mountain rock, and wiped them out. Now, elements of that tale are obviously mythological, but it has a remarkable thematic coherence with Genesis chapter 6. The Apache creation myth is also interesting in this regard, as a particular version involves what they call the one who lives above, who descended down over the mountain in a flying disc at the start of creation. Their myth begins, in the beginning, nothing existed, no earth, no sky, no sun, no moon, only darkness was everywhere. And then the legend starts, before noting that suddenly from the darkness emerged a disc. One side of it was yellow, the other side of it was white. It appeared suspended in midair, and within the disc sat a bearded man, the creator, the one who lives above. Now, besides this creator who rides in a heavenly disc, there's a dragon with the power of speech that turns up, bargaining with mankind, as well as supernatural gateways associated with mountains through which spirit beings have and can come. So suffice it to say that these ancient native ideas involving flying discs, flying creators, spirit guides, even owls and a talking dragon or a great serpent, and supernatural gateways tied to mountain ranges. This is something that began long before the Vatican cast its eyes on Mount Graham. Think how much these legends mirror what the Bible teaches, including the idea that mountaintops or high towers were often depicted as places where doorways into the supernatural could be opened. For instance, Nimrod of biblical fame sets out to build a tower whose top will reach into heaven, Genesis 11:4 says. This was the infamous Tower of Babel, and Nimrod was designing it so that the top of it would extend into Shamayim, heaven, the dwelling place of God. The Jewish Encyclopedia confirms several historical records that Nimrod, who it establishes was also identified by various ancient cultures as Osiris, Orion, Apollo, Gilgamesh, that he had built the Tower of Babel specifically to ascend into the presence of God, into the presence of Jehovah himself. And of course, God came down and said of the tower's design that nothing would be restrained from them which they have imagined to do, Genesis 11:6. So in other words, according to the Lord himself, Nimrod would have accomplished what he imagined to do, and that is to build a tower whose top would reach into the abode of God. Even the name Babylon implies that, echoing the North and South American Indian beliefs about towering gateways and the meaning gate of God or gateway to God. Now, that there could be sacred locations where those beings that can see into the supernatural realm could literally walk onto a high place and enter heaven is really not as far-fetched as it sounds. There are numerous records, including in the Bible, that appear to substantiate the idea that heaven can be attained on high towers or mountainous locations. So think about Moses meeting with God on Sinai, Jesus returning atop the Mount of Olives, the 200 watchers that descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and other examples, including Jacob's Ladder.
Okay, well, Admiral Byrd has a nephew named Harvey Byrd. Harvey Byrd did the foreword for the book Stranger at the Pentagon, who happens to be about an alien named called Valiant Thor who came to Earth. From 1957, there was a spacecraft that landed not too far from the Pentagon, about 14 miles away. Police showed up at the scene. There was a man standing there, and basically they escorted him over to the Pentagon. This man, or this entity, I should say, was here for about 3 years living at the Pentagon and working with the U.S. government. His name was Valiant Thor. Now, this is where it gets weird, because Phil Snyder's dad worked alongside Valiant Thor. And not only did he work with him, he also worked in a lot of the UFO stuff as well as exotic space materials. Now, after his dad passed away, this stuff was found in his father's attic or whatever, and he was going through it and with a couple of his friends, and they started looking into this. But Phil Snyder had already had his encounter because he worked as a geologist at the location that you were talking about, which is the Dulce location. And through me talking with Greg Renrich, that designation for the Dulce location is called S20. So just like Area 51 has S4, they all have different designations, but the one at Dulce is designated as S20. And while he was there, they were basically tunneling, building an area for an underground military base, and they actually punched through something. Now, what Phil Snyder used to say, or what he claimed, was that they knew these entities were already there. That's one of the things that aggravated and irritated him the most, was that the government knew they were there. and they allowed them to go work that in such close proximity. So when they broke through and they went down to see what was wrong with the machine that was tunneling, when they got down there, they encountered these 12-foot tall grays. And Phil said as soon as they saw them, they unholstered the weapons and they began firing. And he said that one of the entities literally threw its hand up in front of his chest like this, and he said all I saw was a blue beam. Next thing I know, I was laying on the ground. It burned his feet, had a big scar on his chest where it basically opened him up like a fish and took some of his fingers off. That was his encounter at the Dulce location.
They know they're dealing with entities. And so in all of that, they began to try to make contact with those entities, maybe for some help, maybe because they're trying to figure out how to close this thing, maybe they're trying to figure out how to undo what Jack Parsons did. So they go through satanic rituals to communicate, because that's the only method of communication that they know that works to contact these entities. In doing this, there's a small faction known as the Collins Elite.
What kind of business are you in?
We predict the future. The best way to predict the future is to invent it.
The Collins Elite was a small group inside of this larger group that was originally created to get answers to all of this. But once they began to engage in satanic rituals and magic and alchemy, this group says, hey, you know what? This is not what we signed up for. This small group raises up. It's a faction. It's a counterpoint group, which means that they're no longer in agreement with the big group. They have a different opinion. They say, we have a Christian worldview. This goes against our Christian worldview. And so they see that entities are being channeled and communicated with, and now technology is being given through these rituals to these other members of the government. So the Collins Elite says, whoa, 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 this is dangerous. You guys are really playing with fire here. We can't support this. We can't do this. And they came up with this idea that the aliens were going to take over, and that in order to protect our country from the aliens, from the entities, they believed that we needed to instate a forced theocracy based on the law of Moses. Because they thought if our country would go back under the law of Moses, that we would be untouchable from these entities. This group, this bigger group that was researching to get answers, they did not exist. Okay, this was what's known as a limited access program, or an LAP. A limited access program means that nobody in Congress has to know about this.
The Collins Elite were a counterpoint group within different governmental organizations that were party to satanic ritual being used to make contact with these aliens or with these higher entities. And because of their Christian faith, they had the conviction. They saw this taking place and they're like, well, we don't need to be a part of this. This is what the Bible talks about, and the worship of demons and of other gods, and especially being, using blood sacrifice and different types of black magic to be able to accomplish it. So they saw that and they didn't want to be a part of it. They also were able to tie this back to what Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard did in the desert in the late 40s.
You've got literally just the group, and maybe a director knows about it. Nobody else. It's completely classified. It's top secret. It's under lock and key. But I want to mention something. One of the bombshells that we dropped was that there's a declassified federal document. Anyone watching this interview can go find this document. It's on the FBI vault. Document 6751. It's a document from the 40s. It was written by a prominent member of academia, and it was submitted to the FBI. In this document, they make a case that entities are not space aliens, but that they're interdimensional or extra-dimensional entities that are crossing over from a plane known as the ethereal plane. Now, we know, as researchers of the New Age movement, we know that that is where the ascended masters are supposedly said to be on a high level. This ethereal plane is very popular, when you talk to people who astral project, people who channel, people who remote view, people who want to tap in or go on a trip, an ayahuasca trip, a DMT trip.
Ayahuasca, different trips, DMT, that does allow you to cross over, or allows a person to cross over into those dimensions. Outside of that, the satanic ritual has proven to be the most effective, and from the research that we've done, the people that we've interviewed, that seems to be the constant. That's like it's a guarantee you're going to make contact if you do this.
Now, the federal government had this document in the 40s, and language was used in this document that came right out of the playbook of Theosophy. Now, the guy that received this document, this is so crazy. The federal agent receives the document, and look, the FBI is constantly bombarded with phone calls and letters and emails, and they just can't deal with all of the propaganda from citizens. People make stuff up, and it's just it's nothing. It's crying wolf. So the FBI has to really be careful what they accept and what they don't. But this was back in the 40s. So the guy that receives the document, he recognizes that this information was received through paranormal means. As a matter of fact, the language used in the 40s was supernormal. That's the old way of saying paranormal, supernormal. So he says that all of this information was received through supernormal means, therefore we need to discount it. It's not valid information. Now that's the headline that he put, it's like a cover letter. If he really believed that, why did they classify the document? Why did they classify it and then forward it to all of these FBI prominent members at the highest level of security clearance? Why in the world would they classify it and lock it up if they didn't believe it? It wasn't until years later that they declassified document 6751. And I read this document and I'm thinking, okay, since the 40s, the federal government at the highest levels have known that these are not space aliens, that these are entities coming from another dimension.
3 very mysterious shiny lights have police and residents puzzled.
This pilot who flew Barack Obama says UFOs are real and he's seen one firsthand.
The triangular-shaped flashing object appears to be floating above the capital city.
So this large disc,
oh yeah,
massive, it was following you.
It was pacing us. Here's this giant red ball just above the clouds.
Unbelievable.
Oh, it was.
4 different species, at least, had been visiting this planet for thousands of years.
I think they're real. I think they're absolutely real, and I think that they are a major deception, a major part of the deception, though. In the end days, I think that we're going to see out of the skies, we're going to see, because that's where the scripture locates what in the Greek is called cosmic crowders, archon. These beings are there. And part of end-time deception, you see the numbers just off the charts nowadays. So I think they are absolutely real. They are there. They're not what the world thinks they are. I think that they are very dark and lethal. But I think when Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many realms, many rooms, that's the word he used. So I think it is dimensional. Whether it's layered or just multi, that I don't know. But I think there's realms different than ours, and they're just beyond us or around us. But I think that they're realities also, and I think that's where we're seeing things coming through to our side from those other realms. Is it nuts and bolts? Is it a projection? In one way, I liken it to the little laser pin you could do, and you could play around. My dog would chase the dot. It would see the dot, but it didn't know that I was the one controlling that whole thing. So from that side, is it a projection? Obviously, there's people who claim they've been up in them, but I don't know if we've nailed down whether it's metal and bolts yet. If it's from a different dimension, different realm, would it be the same as far as metal and bolts? So whatever it's made out of or fashioned out of, I don't know that answer, but I do believe they're absolutely real and they're absolutely solid. In demonization, the mentality thing is right away a little red-horned thing running around. We need to understand them as the Spirit of God reveals them in the original Greek, cosmic crowder, archon, exousia. These beings were different in species or type. I mean, they're all the same in nature, but they are huge in the sense of, in comparison to humanity. They're a superhuman. They're beyond us. So when I think in terms of us contacting them, like we deal with deliverance, there has to be a doorway for them to get over. If this is kind of the wall between the worlds here, and they're wanting to get over, and biblically we know this in dealing with deliverance, they want to get over to this side. There's no question. So the issue is, how do they come through the barrier? How do they come physically through, or to where they're manifesting through? So I believe that means there has to be a gateway, doorway, portal. A Greek word used is topon, a legal access, but the idea also of a way. So I think that on this side of the fence, if we have learned what I believe would be given by them occult means, whether that's psychic meditations, ritual summonings, sacred tones, whatever the method in calling across through this barrier. That is a call, that is a summoning. We as believers in Christ, we call on the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. We read in Psalm 68, summon your power, O God. So the laws of engagement are the same when it comes to the dark side. Now here's the biggest issue I have with the dark side. It's all absolutely real. They're more than they're more than we can even imagine. But the other Greek word I want to always emphasize is metaskizmazo, the word that says when Satan's able to masquerade, transfigure as an angel of light. That's the physics of the dark side, literally to be able to morph their appearance without changing their nature. So whether they come through and show themselves as an ascended master, the Great White Brotherhood, the secret chiefs, an ancestor, or an alien, a Pleiadian, a Orion, however they come through, they are predatory, but can design how they will look in their coming through for the sake of our reception. But we can, through usually occult-oriented means, means that they would give us, had the tools to be able to call them to come over.
If you come in direct contact, and it's not just things like that, it's even people who suffer from sleep paralysis and things like that as well. So, or even close encounters, it's all connected. And the fact that this hitchhiker phenomenon, that it spreads like a virus, so it spreads throughout your family and your friends and co-workers, and it could spread out into the neighborhood. Even the FBI document 6751, if you read that document, it says that the entities are not from another planet, but from another plane or another reality or another dimension, is the way that it's worded in those documents, or that document in particular. And it says that they are not normal size like us. It says they are much larger. A lot of these people that have gone out to Skinwalker Ranch or some of these other things that we've discussed, when they are seeing these shadow people in their homes, some of them say that they are anywhere between 8 to 10 feet tall. And it doesn't just stop right there either. Even at S2, which is an Air Force base, and at S2, George Knapp has talked about they have seen shadow people out at these military bases, and that they are roaming and running around. Guards have encountered them and pulled guns on them. Well, if you listen very carefully to what the Navajo and the people are saying out there, especially the indigenous people, they talk about these things like they're more demonic entity, and this is coming from them. In fact, do you know much about the Great Witch Purge of 1878? That was not too long after they had been resettled, and they thought that part of the reason why they had been kicked off the land had something to do with witches. And so when they dug up a body of one of the Indians that had been buried, they found a copy of the treaty in that Indian's stomach, and they believed that it had something to do with witches. So they killed several members of their tribe, thinking that was the Great Witch Purge of 1878. They believe that the witches, they commit these murders. They either commit a murder of somebody who's very close to them or somebody who's very near and dear to them, and that by doing so, it opens them up and gives them this power to shapeshift. But again, when you really look into this stuff, these things are coming from another dimension or another realm. Because out there at Skinwalker Ranch, they have seen these things, literally windows, portals opening up out there, and that they exit these portals, these windows, and they roam around. In fact, they had one that came out of a portal, ran across a field, another portal opened up, and it went through that portal and disappeared.
Is it another dimension? Like when you go through the door, is it another plane of existence?
They've even ran into the predator creature out there, not on one occasion, but multiple occasions out there at Skinwalker Ranch. Back when Terry Sherman owned the ranch, they ran into the predator creature. A gentleman that had heard some of the news events about what was going on out there when they first started talking about it before Bigelow even showed up and bought the ranch. somebody had drove out there and wanted to know if he could go out onto the property and pray or meditate. So he's sitting out there praying and meditating, and next thing they know, they keep hearing a cowbell, but none of Terry's cows had any cowbells on them. So all of a sudden he saw something like a blur running from the tree line towards this individual who was sitting out there in the middle of this pasture. And whatever it was, he said it was humongous. He said it ran up and stood right over him. He said it was louder than a bear and a lion. And it let out this humongous roar. And the guy actually jumped 6 feet back from a sitting position. And he was so petrified, he would not let go of them after they ran over and helped him back up. Finally, Terry had to tell him, he said, if you don't let go of me, I'm going to hit you. And he told him, he said, I'll let go of you, but you got to get me off this property. And he said, this property is cursed. He said, you're dealing with the devil.
You ever dance with the devil by the pale moonlight?
This has been going on for a very long time because Franciscan monks who have been out there since 1776 have reported seeing 3 fireballs flying around in the sky out there. So this has been going on for a very long time. The Indians have known it even longer than that. And like I said, most of them, they won't even go near the ranch. And the ones that do, they usually take offerings or animal skins and they put them on the fence post to ward off the demonic spirits and keep them at bay. That's their words. Brandon Fugel, in an interview that he did with Sean Ryan, actually said that. And that's the thing, is that they don't even like talking about these entities. And it's not just that, but it's Wendigo. Any of these entities that you can name off, they do not like them being mentioned because, like they said, if you talk about them, it's invoking them. And they will come looking for you. So this sounds more demonic than anything. Even Jacques Vallée and a lot of these researchers, especially like Nigel Kerner and all these other ufologists out there that really study this, they all akin the whole alien thing that it's more demonic than it is something coming from another galaxy or another world.
The Bible, what if it's connected?
Do you think it's connected?
Yeah, it's all absolutely connected. In fact, did you know that Kenneth Arnold and Jack Parsons were flying buddies? And Robert Goddard, who was another rocket engineer that was early pioneer in the rocket engineering, lived in Roswell, and he also knew both of these individuals. So you got that. So it's like you have the Kenneth Arnold sighting, and less than 2 weeks later you have the Roswell crash, and that these individuals all knew one another. The U.S. Air Force started investigating Jack Parsons because of when he worked for Howard Hughes, and he had taken classified documents out of the facility without permission. And so once they started investigating him, that's what led them into learning that him, L. Ron Hubbard, were understudies of Aleister Crowley, and that they had been doing this ritual called the Babylon Working between the years 1945 and 1946, and that supposedly they were successful in 1946. I believe that they actually did exactly what they set out to do, to bring about Babylon, the Whore of Babylon, and the Son of Perdition end times. In fact, it was Charles Race Tussell, who was the creator of Jehovah's Witnesses, who said that the end of the world would begin on October 14th, 1912? And that was the same day that Jack Parsons was born.
Okay, that's freaky.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's freaky, right?
What are the odds of that? Well, not just the rituals that they were performing out there at his mansion that he lived at, but also whenever they would go out and they would do these rocket launches, he was performing rituals to the Greek god Pan and doing all sorts of things. So, I mean, this stuff, it gets really dark and really deep really quickly. In fact, the place that they would go out there and do these rocket tests was called Devil's Gate Dam. In fact, him and his Suicide Squad, another interesting term right there. And come to find out, the same Robert Goddard that we were talking about a while ago, that's where he did all his rocket experiments. It's the exact same location, Devil's Gate Dam. So, like I said, you're seeing coincidence after coincidence and just over and over overlap. It's all completely connected. In fact, looking into the hitchhiker effect, which is part of Skinwalker Ranch, that led me into the remote viewers. I found out, I thought they were the early pioneers of the hitchhiker effect, because Uri Geller, one of the researchers, was part of SRI and the early remote viewing program. When they were researching him and looking into his powers, all the scientists that were assigned to researching him started having the hitchhiker effect in their homes and their families. The branch of the CIA called MK Offen, and this branch, that was their thing, was that they got into the occult and esoteric, pretty much kind of like the Ahnenerbe was the Nazis' version. You know, they had several things like the Thule Society and Vril, but it was the Ahnenerbe who was really steeped in the occult, as well as the Vril. But yeah, MK Offen, I mean, they would infiltrate seances. They would send members into seances. They actually openly talked with witches, active witches. In fact, one of the most well-known witches, this well-known witch was Sybil Leek. This lady, she was so well known that H.G. Wells, Lawrence of Arabia, and Aleister Crowley all used to visit her back when she was 9 years old. Her family was that connected. In fact, when MK Offen was dealing with her and approaching her, she would tell them where the most active covens were, all the different locations of witches and covens all around the world. I mean, you know that also, what was it, Crowley and several of his colleagues, they all worked with British intelligence. So that's another thing, is like a lot of these people that are steeped in the occult and witchcraft and things like that, and demonic and satanic rituals, also have a lot to do with spies and spy agencies, different governments, intelligence agencies. There was a lady at the beginning of the film that you hear her talking about that she witnessed satanic rituals going on out at military bases. And she said that a lot of the people that are mixed up in the naval intelligence, not all of them, but a lot of them, are mixed up with the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis.
There was programming. They use military bases because they won't have any interference when they have someone on a military base. And a lot of my programming took place on military bases. I would like to talk about the fact that there are rituals done at the military bases also, and that rituals are not a cover. The people that do the mind control are involved, and rituals are very much a part of how they do things. For example, naval intelligence members or people that are in naval intelligence are usually very involved with Ordo Templi Orientis. And that doesn't mean that everyone in naval intelligence is involved in that. But naval intelligence is responsible for a lot of overseeing of ritual activity in this country. And they are responsible for a lot of this going on. There are other organizations, other agencies involved, but naval intelligence is very involved.
Well, not just that, but I don't know if you've read the book about Laurel Canyon. Have you read any of that stuff and looked into it? Oh man, yeah, the whole hippie movement. And I touched a little bit on this because people like Timothy Leary, who was big on promoting LSD and things like that, this was all part of the CIA and their MK Ultra, as well as MK Offen and all that. In fact, this goes all the way back to Edgewood Arsenal. And they needed a giant pool of test subjects. So they were using the American public as guinea pigs so that they could see about tapping into powers, opening doors. And these kids thought that they were just doing this and that they were just tripping on acid and that they were having this experience, but they were opening doors to the demonic.
Everything they've experienced has been a manifestation of the demonic.
It's something demonic.
About dark forces and demonic attacks.
So just gotta ask, what's going on?
What do you think's going on?
I think that they've been dealing with they've been initiating satanic rituals at all levels of government, because they are trying to tap into these things. They want to make contact. It's no different than John Dee back when he was the person that worked for Queen Elizabeth. He was doing the exact same thing. He was tapping into the demonic and to get power, technology, and a lot of the things. That's the thing, is that these rituals also, they're able to control humanity through what most people think of as like MK Often, MK Ultra, things like this, where it's like mind brainwashing, things like that. But it's actually occult rituals, and it's not just the United States government; it's multiple governments. In fact, at the end of the film, or towards the end of the film, I have the footage where it shows the explosion of UFOs that takes place from 1947 leading up to 2012. And when you get done watching that, you see that the United States, as well as Australia and England or Europe, we're the most brightly lit places on the entire planet.
Like something out of Lovecraft or Poe.
I find it fascinating. Lovecraft fan, huh?
And I suppose he was a friend of H.P. Lovecraft, and you're pulling Cthulhu rank on me.
H.P. Lovecraft and Aleister Crowley both, around the same time, encountered an entity. Crowley said that it referred to itself as Cthulhu, and it was H.P. Lovecraft who said it revealed itself to him as Cthulhu. But there was Kenneth Grant, who was the secretary of Thelema, who took over Thelema and OTO after Crowley died, and he wrote a 9-book series called the Typhonian series. And in the one book, he came out and said that Crowley misunderstood. He said that he had encountered the exact same entity that H.P. Lovecraft did. He just misunderstood, and that they were the same entity, and that it was actually Cthulhu. And Lovecraft, even Kenneth Grant, in his book Aleister Crowley and the Hidden God, he said that Lovecraft was dealing with things that he didn't fully understand. He had tapped into something, but he wasn't doing it through occult rituals. In fact, his father, I believed, was stricken with, I think his father actually went insane, if I remember correctly. And that, I don't know if these are generational curses or what, but I think at the same time, Lovecraft was tapping into things that invoked a lot of this stuff. And what he was writing about these old ones, he was just talking about fallen angels and Nephilim spirits. And so that was the reason that Kenneth Grant came out and said that he had been snuffed out, because he was tapping into things but wasn't giving them the full credit that they deserved. And so that's why they took him out. We talked about Crowley, that he had invoked the first entity, Aiwass, and he never saw Aiwass. He just dictated the Book of the Law. But in the Book of the Law, it actually stated that it was Aleister Crowley was convinced that the Book of the Law was going to bring about the Son of Perdition, and eventually the end times was another thing. In fact, after it was released, when it first came out, World War I broke out quickly, not too long after. And then he decided to re-release the book right before World War II broke out. And once he re-released it, and then World War II broke out, he was convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that it played some sort of a role in bringing about the end times and the Son of Perdition. In fact, he referred to this by invoking something, these world wars, so that there would be mass blood sacrifice, and what he called baptism of blood for the Son of Perdition. Those aren't my words, that's Kenneth Grant's words. Well, Crowley never referred to them as alien or anything like. In fact, he didn't even refer to them as angels or demons. He just referred to them as Enochian entities, which is what John Dee used to refer to these individuals or these entities as. But yeah, when you look at the drawing that he did of Lamb, it totally looks like a gray alien. In fact, Stephen Greer, who does the CE5 research, so he does this. One of the things that they did out there in the desert where they were doing the CE5 a alien appeared flying over the group of people that was out there. And when you look at that photograph and put it right beside the drawing of Lamb, they're identical, completely identical. And that's the thing, is that, you know, most people think that this has to do with some sort of an alien hybrid program. It has nothing to do with that. They may be doing some of this stuff as far as like hybridization, but that's not what this is about. In fact, Nigel Kerner, one of the leading ufologists, he came out and said that him and John Mack, and who else was it? Whitley Strieber. They all three say that this has something to do with the human soul. They are trying to somehow implant themselves into the human soul. So you got to ask yourself, why are they so fascinated with the human soul?
Sometimes something so bad happens that a terrible sadness is carried with it, and the soul can't rest.
I believe that this is all antediluvian. You know, the whole, you know, nothing new under the sun. You know, people think of things like Star Trek and Star Wars. It's like they think they're looking to the future, but you're actually looking into the past. Whatever you could think of, it's already been done. And the whole thing about these craft, Bob Lazar was talking about the 9 craft for a long time. He's actually taken people like John Lear and Phil Snyder and all them have gone out there with him. They've seen the craft flying around. In fact, he got arrested, and they threatened his life, and that's why he ended up leaving the program. And he went public about it because he thought that they were going to kill him. Bob Lazar had already came out and said that, you know, one of the craft that they had found out there, and this was in the Joe Rogan podcast, but he told Joe Rogan that one of the craft that they had out there was actually found at an archaeological dig. So it wasn't just old, it was ancient. So when you think of things like Vimanas, and you hear stories about these craft that can fly from continent to continent, pole to pole, you know, that Admiral Byrd was talking about, it's like, this is not anything new. Now, David Grush, you know, that's a little more current. He's the whistleblower that came out and was talking about all these black budget programs, and that, you know, they had all these crafts all around the country at different locations, different facilities that they were trying to back engineer, and that's where we get a lot of the technology from. I mean, right after 1947, the Roswell crashed, and all of a sudden we had cell phones. I mean, the cell phone came out in 1947. Most people don't even know that. You know, the whole thing about the transistors and things like that, all this stuff was coming out right around 1947. 1947 was a pivotal year because of everything they were doing with the Babylon working ritual, plus the Mount Rainier sighting, and then the Roswell crash not even 2 weeks later. But look at all the other things that were happening in 1947. You know, that Israel had already been agreed upon to become a state again, and that it was actually enacted in 1948, but yet it was agreed upon in 1947. Then you had the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found, and you just look at all the things that just kept happening in 1947. That was something was unlocked. Something was transpiring. I think that what they had actually set out to do about setting off and bringing about the end times and triggering it, I think they were successful. They've triggered a lot of events that will bring about the end of the world, that Jesus will come and return, and that, you know, God will pour out his wrath on the wicked and remove the wicked from the face of the earth.
It's all part of their long game. They've been working on this since the beginning of time. It didn't work at the Tower of Babel. The Lord ended it quickly, you know, but here we are today. Where are we today, and what happened between then and now? Well, what we find out is that one of our contacts, Stan Deyo, who, by the way, Tom Horn gave us a great endorsement of Stan Deyo. Tom Horn, before his house burned down years ago, he had this big newspaper article from the UK. And standing on the cover with these other elite doctors and scientists, it's Stan Deyo. And they're giving him credit in the UK, public knowledge, that he's working on anti-gravity craft. Now, the film that we did called The Hollow Earth Chronicles, we did a whole segment in that film on Operation High Jump. This was a joint task force between the American government, the British government, and the Australian government, headed by the US and Admiral Byrd. They go down to Antarctica, and what turns into a UFO battle and their big plan got cut in half, and they had to come home early because we lost men, we lost ships. There's stories of UFOs coming up out of the water and just cutting ships in half with laser. I mean, just crazy stuff that you only see in movies. What's fascinating about this is that this was a joint task force with those same three governments that are now working together with Standeo, the British, the American, and the Australians working together on alien technology yet again, years after Operation High Jump happened. Standeo was working as a secret agent for the FBI in Australia inside of the deep underground military bases. And he said while he was in the program, he knew about the deal with Eisenhower. He knew in the program that President Eisenhower had made a deal with what they called alien entities. I believe that the evidence points to two events taking place, and these two events happened 1 year apart. The first one happened at Edwards Air Force Base, where Eisenhower disappears, and they call it a media blackout. It was kind of similar to when Hillary Clinton and President Obama disappeared and were at the Bilderberg meeting, but nobody knew where they were, and it was called the media blackout. People freaked out, right? Well, something similar happened here, where Eisenhower is no longer on radar, and they come back later and say, oh, well, he had a dental emergency, and so he had to go seek private dental care. Now, that happened, and then a year later, we have the Holloman Air Force Base event. Now, the thing about the Holloman event was that people were there who witnessed it. Holloman is where they were out on the landing strip, and you had UFOs landing, meeting with him. Meeting took place with Eisenhower and others, and then those UFOs took off. Now, there were eyewitnesses who have come forward. I was just talking about this with Chad Riley because he found some videotapes from the 90s. This is before the internet was doing its thing. In the 90s, there were videos that were recorded, old VHS tapes of some of these disclosure type engagements. I don't know what you want to call it, but these are men that were there. They're decorated men from the government, and they're now speaking out that yes, UFOs were landing and taking off at Holloman Air Force Base, and I believe it was 1955.
The Air Force insists it treats serious reports seriously. Chief Scientific Consultant of Project Blue Book is Professor J. Allen Hynek, head of the Dearborn Observatory at Northwestern University. He took on the assignment 18 years ago. He talked with Joseph Wershba of CBS Reports.
Is it in the realm of possibility that there are spaceships someplace in this universe?
Well, if you put it in the word, use the word possibility and not probability, then I would have to say, I think as any scientist would have to say, it is certainly possible, yes. But I think we must always distinguish between the two terms possible and probable. A thing may be scientifically possible, but the probability of its occurring may be extremely small, you see. To this time, there is no proof that I would consider valid scientific proof that we have been visited by spaceships. I would say the great majority are balloons, meteors, satellites, aircraft seen with the sun glinting off of them, and birds. And then you get into a host of minor things. But in general, you can say that the IFOs, the identified ones, have turned out to be generally quite usual things seen under unusual circumstances or surprising circumstances. It's a global thing. What it is, please don't ask me. I'm still puzzled. You might call me a study in puzzlement. But that among the tremendous noise or static or crud or whatever you want to call it of tremendous number of unreliable reports that are easily explained, there is this residue of most interesting cases that intrigue me in the same way that a good mystery story intrigues me, and I'd like to get the solution. I don't think it is space people, although I would be delighted if it turned out that way, because as an astronomer, I think it would make astronomy even more interesting than it is. And as far as the Air Force is concerned, I can't speak for them, of course, but I should imagine that if the existence of spacecraft were really established, it would really increase the appropriations of the Air Force.
But how do you answer the people who are pretty competent, careful, cautious, probing people, pilots, radar trackers?
Those are particularly the people that I like to talk to, because They understand what angular rates are. They understand scientific terminology. I can ask them, what was the altitude and azimuth when you first saw it? What was its azimuth and altitude when it disappeared? What was its angular acceleration? They can give you an intelligent answer to a thing like that.
What is your answer to the people who are sure there are spaceships and they say that you and the Air Force are in cahoots?
Well, first of all, this business about being in cahoots is just simply a downright falsehood. And if they insist that space vehicles exist, I say, oh, fine, the burden of proof is on you.
This is going to lead us right into Ray Boucher. Ray Boucher is now bringing all of this current. You know, we're no longer dealing with 1940s or 50s or 60s. We're dealing with, you know, our lifetime, and this is where it just hits home. Ray Boucher is an ordained minister. He has been a Baptist minister, a Lutheran minister, and he's also known as a Lutheran exorcist. We're very particular about who we work with and who we yoke up with in ministry. And after talking with Ray and looking into him, he is extremely biblically sound. His theology is right in line with Scripture on all the majors that would matter. And so we did some homework on this guy. Tom Horn, Derek Gilbert, goodness, everybody that we talked to, people that I'm not even going to name, people that we talked to off the record, everybody kept saying, including Darren Geisinger and Chad Riley, they all said, you got to talk to Ray Boucher. They said he was met with by two members of the Department of Defense because of his unique background as a minister, as an exorcist, and as the head of MUFON for his state, which is Nebraska. This is a guy who was heavily involved in the UFO community back before the internet was a thing. He would go to these meetings, he would read up. I mean, back then it was like a videotape. It was like $60, like a documentary videotape. You pay $60. I mean, these were the days before the internet, before YouTube. Information was harder to get. But Ray Boucher was heavily involved in the UFO community back in the day. And so being the head of MUFON, and also for his state, and also for being a minister and an exorcist and a UFO advocate, you know, a UFO truth advocate, these two men contact him from the DOD, and they say, we really need to meet with you because of your unique standing. We need to meet with you, and we need your, basically we need you to consult with us about what some of this may be. So he met secretly with these members of the Department of Defense, and they told him that they were part of a non-existent group inside the DOD working on government facilities paid for by taxpayer dollars, and that they began to try to get answers to some of this stuff, and they began to engage in occult rituals to communicate with these entities. Now let me explain this. If you don't feel like this is just a reoccurrence of the Collins elite, I mean, this is recent. This is happening in the modern time period. He says that their bigger group was engaging in what he called satanic rituals, and he even said that the DOD contacts hinted at human sacrifice being done on the taxpayer dollar behind closed doors on government facilities. He said they started off with, we just want to get answers. And he says, and that turned into a we can do better mentality. We can do more than this. We can go above and beyond. This is the same story you see when you're watching movies about famous drug dealers. Oh, we can do better mentality. It starts off, they're just selling a little dope. And before you know it, they're a kingpin, and they just want more and more and more. It's not that they need it anymore, but it's that we can do better mentality. We can't leave well enough alone, to quote Karate Kid.
You couldn't leave well enough alone. Could you, little twerp?
We cannot leave well enough alone, and we can do better, and we're going to do better, and we're going to get more technology, we're going to get more information, we're going to get more power, and we're going to rise up by the power of the entities. And so Ray Boucher explained to them that yes, this stuff was extremely demonic. That yes, y'all had a good idea. Basically, your instincts were correct. This is demonic and you don't need to be doing it. They knew that was the case, but they needed someone they could talk to, such as Ray Boucher with his unique background. And so he was able to meet with them, and I believe they met twice. They had some phone conversations. But the thing is Ray wouldn't meet with us originally. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He's a very friendly guy. He was willing to just be cordial and hello, nice to meet you. But when we told him we wanted him on camera and that we wanted to meet with him, it was like, well, I could probably work with you guys at some point. He says, but I'm really busy. It's kind of like the nice way of saying, sorry, can't help you. We continued to try to reach out to him. We began our investigation. We talked with Tom Horn and Derek Gilbert and these others. Derek Gilbert told us to go listen to an interview he did with a podcast. Dr. Future, I think, was the name of the show. And we listened to it. And at the very beginning of the podcast, the guy says, wow, we've been trying to schedule this with you for over a year, and you're finally coming on to talk with us. So I imagine Ray Boucher is extremely careful. He's very standoffish. He wants to protect his family. He doesn't want to get involved in something he shouldn't be. And so I just kind of wrote it off that he's not going to meet with us. And we're probably going to have to just go ahead and end this project early. He finally comes through and says, okay, I'll do it. But I'm not going to tell you where we're going to meet or what time we're going to meet. He says, plan on coming down and getting a hotel in the big city close by. So we did. We went down. We got a hotel in the big city. And it was a big city, by the way. This city was booming and busy. I mean, crazy busy the whole time we were there. We didn't know until the morning of what time we were going to meet and the fact that he was going to come to us at our hotel room. That's how secretive he is. And just to add a little bit of mystery to this situation, shortly after we got done releasing this film, I get word that Ray Boucher has been diagnosed with some strange, rare kind of cancer. So I say that to ask people to be praying for him. One of the bonus nuggets that we released in Higher Entities was there was a guy who had very high security clearance. I believe it was a lieutenant colonel. I forget. Chad Riley knows it was his contact. It wasn't our contact. And by the way, let me just give a quick shout out to Chad Riley. He's the guy who fishes up these documents that nobody's ever heard of. Nice. Like, we are blessed to have people are like, how do you even get some of this information? Well, we've got a guy on our team named Chad Riley, and he has a skill to where he fishes up these rare documents from the FBI vault that nobody's ever heard of. And so it's a blessing to have him on board, and he's also our co-producer. So having Chad on board, because somebody's going to wonder, how did you find document 6751? It was downloaded. You can only download it, like, if you don't know how to find it, you got to download it in a thick packet called the UFO packet #1, which, by the way, is available on the FBI vault. The same FBI vault where they admitted that Hitler was alive in Argentina after World War II. People ask where we got that document that we showed in the Hollow Earth Chronicles. Well, we got it from the FBI. While I was doing an interview with Gon Shimura on Face Like the Sun YouTube channel, he goes to pull up the document. His IP address is blocked from accessing that document. He had to go in and change his settings live on the recording that we did. He had to change his browser settings just to access 6751. Now, I don't want to digress. This is so important. We're dealing with this idea of government agencies doing anything it takes to keep you from getting the Easter egg. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. They're trying to hide their Easter eggs. And so what happened here was Chad's contact, his name is Greg Renrich. He has the above top secret clearance, areas such as Groom Lake, Area 51, a list. Chad breaks down the whole list in Higher Entities. And so Chad was in contact with him through our other mutual contact, Kay Carswell, who's a dear friend of ours. Kay has become friends with Greg Renrich. They've interviewed him. I don't know if they've interviewed him publicly or just private, but he started to give Chad all this information that we were going to include in our film. And so the information was unbelievable, and I'll give that information away here in a second, but I want to just say he was supposed to be in our film. At some point, he just decides he's going to just fall off the face of the earth and back out. And so we're trying to get answers, like what's going on with Greg Renrich. I mean, he was a prime interview. We needed him. This guy has been down in the underground bases with the entities. See, Stan Deyo didn't work directly with entities. His colleagues worked with the entities. Wow. So Stan's was hearsay, trustworthy hearsay, but he didn't work with the entities. This guy, Greg Renrich, worked in the base with entities that called themselves the Nephilim. They were 9-10 feet tall entities, and they told him that they were preparing for an intergalactic war with God and that they were going to win. They believed they were going to win. Furthermore, Greg Renrich is on record saying that he had to sign an affidavit before he could go in this facility, that he wouldn't even use the name Jesus, even as a cuss word, in this deep underground military base, And this goes right back to what Joe Jordan says, is that hundreds of cases of alien abduction completely halted at the name of Jesus being proclaimed. Even if he stubbed his toe as a cuss word, he couldn't say Jesus.
I'll go back to the quote from Aleister Crowley. We mentioned this in the film, but he says that today we're calling them angels and demons, tomorrow we'll call them something else. So we could, in the world standards, we can call them aliens. In the world standards, we can call them ascended masters, light beings, give them a name. But scripturally, I'll go back to the same beings that were depicted in Genesis 6.
What you really need to do to get a handle on the UFO thing, strangely enough, is to do your homework in Genesis chapter 6. And I want you to notice the first 2 verses, and I want you to pay attention that the first 2 verses are a single sentence. Many people stumble because they don't realize that's a single sentence. You'll see what I'm getting at in a minute. Genesis 6, verse 1. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the Benai Elohim, the sons of God, as it's translated, saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. 1 verse. Now the question is, this strange phrase, sons of God, that can mean anything to us. Let's find out what the text really means, sons of God. What it is in the Hebrew is, remember, Hebrew goes from right to left, so if you're watching the slides here, remember all languages go towards Jerusalem. Nations that are east of Jerusalem go from right to left, the language. Nations that are west of Jerusalem go from left to right. So just breaking, so Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, Sanskrit, whatever, they go right to left. Anyway, so if you're reading the Hebrew here, recognize it goes from right to left. Benai Ha Elohim, the sons of the God. Now, sons of God, Benai Ha Elohim is a term that's always used of a direct creation of God. Adam was a direct creation of God. You and I, in the natural, are not. We're sons of Adam. That's our problem. That's what the book of Romans is all about. But as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. The term has technical meaning in the New Testament as well as the Old. In the Old Testament, this term in the Hebrew, in Job 1:6, Job 2:1, Job 38:7, is always used of angels, because they are a direct creation of God. In the New Testament, also Luke 20:36. Also the book of Enoch. Now, don't misunderstand my use of this as a citation here. The book of Enoch was very popular from about the 2nd century before Christ to the 2nd century after. It is not an inspired book. I wouldn't treat it that way, but it is useful in understanding the vocabulary and the grammar of the time. And clearly in the book of Enoch, this term is used there also to refer to angels, and it deals with it greatly. The Septuagint, and the Septuagint also makes it clear that we're dealing here with angels, as we think of them. Now in Genesis 6, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all whom they chose. The word sons of God, of course, is Benai Ha Elohim, sons of God, direct creation, term for angels. Saw the daughters of men. Now, by the way, what that really says in the Hebrew is Banath Adam, daughters of Adam. Now, when you get down to verse 4 of Genesis 6, it said there were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became the mighty men which were of old, men of renown. What this verse seems to indicate is that these Nephilim were offspring of a strange union. The sons of God, these are angels according to the Hebrew precision here. They came in unto the daughters of men, daughters of Adam, incidentally. This is not just Cain and Seth and any of that. This is the daughter. These are daughters of men, and they bear children to them. It's those children that are the Nephilim. Now, what on earth is the Nephilim? That word Nephilim is a key word. We're going to talk a lot about that. Nephilim means the fallen ones. It comes from the verb nephal, which means to fall, be cast down, to fall away, to desert. That's what a Nephilim is, a deserter, in a sense. What the passage portrays, and it's very difficult for many people to absorb this, it portrays fallen angels. These are not the good guys. Remember when Satan fell, a third of the angels fell with him. Not all of them, but a group of them, apparently, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, chose to try to create a hybrid race by cohabiting. I don't know the technology. I'm not going to get into that. But they apparently were... See, angels can't multiply. Angels are eternal. Reproduction is a process for mortals. But at the same time, Satan's got a problem. A third of the angels fell with him, so he's got a deficiency of 2 to 1 in any war that comes in. Right? He's got to find a way to strengthen himself. This is just a conjecture that floats around. Now, the offspring are Nephilim. They're also called the Hagibarim, the mighty ones. And now, where the confusion starts to set in is when this Hebrew passage was translated into the Greek in the Septuagint, the word they used for the Nephilim was gigantes. It sounds like giants, and it turns out they were giants, but that's not what the word means. Gigantes comes from gigas, which means earthborn. So in the Hebrew, they're called the fallen ones. In the Greek, they're called the earthborn. And so let's keep that in mind. The fact that they were giants is like a pun. Yes, they were giants, but that's not what the word means. It carries a different meaning. Let's go on a little further in verse 9 of Genesis 6. It says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Terrific verse. We've all read it. But most of us may not pay attention to what that's really saying. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. What does that mean? Well, the word perfect in the Hebrew is tamim. What it means is without blemish, sound, healthful, without spot, unimpaired. What that verse seems to indicate is that Noah's genealogy was unblemished. Now, this comes on right after the verses that talk about these strange goings-on, where these fallen angels have created some weird form of hybrid, but Noah was unblemished in his generations, and that's one of the reasons that God chose Noah and his 3 sons and their 4 wives to start over again. The purpose of the flood was not just that there was sin in the land. There was, and that's emphasized. But if sin brings the flood, we better get some life jackets. No, there's something far deeper going on. That's what I want to sensitize you for when you do your own study and come to your own conclusions. But I want you to recognize there's something much more profound that God is a problem that God was solving, and that is that Satan's strategy was to contaminate the human race. When you get to the book of Jude, Jude makes an allusion to this very event in Jude verses 6 and 7. Jude is just one chapter. But in verses 6 and 7, Jude writes, and the angels, and by the way, this is in the Greek, so it's not ambiguous, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of that great day, even as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Jude is talking about judgment on the bad guys. And he mentions among these things, these angels which sinned back in Genesis 6. These angels kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains. These angels that participated in Genesis 6 apparently are chained, awaiting a special judgment. We'll talk. Peter's going to talk about that in a minute. And Jude asks to add something else here. He makes a comparison between the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah and the sins of these angels, in that they were doing that which is unnatural. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. He's using that as an additional exemplar, lumping the angels with him. The angels went after strange flesh, so did Sodom and Gomorrah. They're both reserved for special judgment. You follow me? You can read it, check it out yourself. That's one confirmation. That's in Jude. Let's take a look at, see, they left their own habitation. We're going to come back to that in a minute. And going after strange flesh is the allusion here. Let's turn to 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. 2 Peter, in Peter's second letter, he says, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus," it's translated hell in your English Bible, but the Greek word is Tartarus. It's the only place that word appears in the Bible. I'll come back to that. "If God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah," and he goes on. So Peter does a couple of things here. He again alludes to the angels that sinned. They're cast into Tartarus. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And they're reserved for a final judgment. "And spared not the old world, but saved Noah." In other words, he ties that event, the days of Noah. So he not only confirms Genesis 6, but he also links it to the days of Noah. Okay. The word Tartarus deserves some comment. The problem with this word is it doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible, but it does appear in Greek literature. It's the Greek term for the dark abode of woe. It is the pit of darkness in the unseen world. It shows up, for example, in Homer's Iliad, where Tartarus is as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. So where's Tartarus? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. So Tartarus was a term for a deep, special. It was regarded as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. So it's where these angels are chained until the final thing. Now, if you study classic Greek mythology, you run into the Titans. These creatures in the legends and the myths were partly terrestrial and partly celestial. They rebelled against their father Uranus, and after a prolonged contest were defeated by Zeus and condemned where? Into Tartarus. Do you see a parallel brewing here? I'm going to suggest to you that the legends of the ancient Greeks embody the truth of what really happened in the past, that there were these strange creatures generating hybrids that the Greek called Titans.
And isn't it interesting the way Hollywood is beating this drum about the return of the Titans? Thanos, the Mad Titan, Sam Worthington, who was in Clash of the Titans and Wrath of the Titans, starred in a movie last year, went straight to Netflix, called The Titan, and the new Godzilla movie, where they have rebranded them. They're no longer Mutos, which is what, monsters of unusual size or whatever. They rebranded them as the Titans, the original and rightful rulers of Earth. Because again, presenting them as Titans, the original and rightful rulers of the Earth. The Titans are still around. In fact, I argue in my book, Last Clash of the Titans, that they are somehow still influencing things on this Earth, even though they are currently chained in the abyss. Revelation 9 says they're going to get out for 5.5 months at the end. When the Nephilim return, and we understand that the Nephilim, the spirits of the Nephilim that were destroyed in the days of Noah, in the flood, were barred entrance into the afterlife, into the netherworld, into heaven, basically condemned to roam the earth. That was the belief of the early church. That was the belief of the Jews in the time of Jesus and through all, the Old Testament period. It wasn't until Augustine in about the 5th century that belief went away. He also basically turned the church away from believing that the Nephilim had been created at all. Ezekiel, though, saw it. And this is the thing. God bless people like L.A. Marzulli who've been, teaching this for a long time. He's right. The Nephilim are returning. Where I differ with L.A., and, I've got to give him credit, because without him and his book Nephilim, which was a novel that got me down this path, I wouldn't be here right now. But I think Ezekiel 39 is a clue, but you got to understand the worldview of the prophets to understand what Ezekiel was writing. In Ezekiel 39, he's writing about the culmination of the war of Gog and Magog, and Gog was the Old Testament Antichrist figure, okay? He is the figure that John in the book of Revelation calls the Antichrist. That is the same war that culminates with the Battle of Armageddon, which is fought for the Har Moed, God's Mount of Assembly, which is Zion, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Ezekiel says, God said that he will prepare a place in Israel for burial of Magog, the forces of Magog. The Valley of the Travelers east of the sea refers to east of the Dead Sea, and It will block the travelers. The key is understanding that travelers in the Old Testament concept, the Old Testament world, were spirits that would travel or cross over from one plane of existence to another. In other words, the realm of the dead to the land of the living. And the places where he identifies east of the Dead Sea are places that during the Exodus, the stations of the Exodus, refer to a couple of places that are named for these interactions with the spirit realm. One of the stops in the Exodus, one of the stations of the Exodus is called Ovoth, which means spirits of the dead. It's based on a root word Ov, which means medium. The medium of Endor that Saul went to see was the Ov of Endor. In fact, one of the giants killed by David's men, Ishbi, they condense the word. Ishbi Benab is how it looks to us in English. Ishbi Ben Ov. Ishbi, son of the necromancer, son of the medium. And he was of the descendants of the Rapha, the sons of the Rephaim. The Rephaim were these spirits that the Amorites, the Canaanites, believed were the spirits of the mighty men who were of old, the ancestors of their kings. They were called in Canaanite texts, called by scholars the Rephaim texts, written about the time of the Judges, where these Rephaim were summoned through necromancy rituals to the tabernacle of El, Mount Hermon, where El, they believed, would speak words of revivification to resurrect these spirits that were called warriors of Baal. And in these texts, they're described as warriors. They mount their chariots and they travel first one day and then another. And at dawn of the third day, they arrive to be resurrected. Like Jesus, who went down and preached and proclaimed to the spirits in prison until dawn of the third day, when he arrived, except that he really was resurrected. And Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 39 says, this is where these travelers will be buried. Another one of the stops on in fact, the mountain where Moses was led by God to get his only view of the Holy Land, the Promised Land. Climb this mountain of the Avarim. In Hebrew, that means travelers.
And we see Zeus in many forms. We see Atlas and Hercules. Atlas and Hercules from Greek mythology were what would be called in the Hebrew Nephilim, offspring of an intermarriage between a god and a woman. And so now these legends we obviously see in the Sumer culture, in Assyria, in Egypt. I'll show you a few things. In the Incas, the Mayan, the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the Persian mythology, and certainly in the Greek mythology, which most of us as products of Western civilization are familiar with. Also in India, Bolivia, South Sea Islands. Every one of these cultures, and the American Indians, every one of these cultures have legends of the star people. These people that came, these gods or demigods, whatever, came and cohabited with women and produced hybrids. I discover from some apparent experts in the American Indian culture that this business of holding a hand up saying how, that's Hollywood. But what apparently was the practice when they met a stranger was to hold up the hand so they could count fingers. They had a terror of the six-fingered people. And if you go to the ruins at Chaca, New Mexico, they have one of the exhibits there that you want to take a look at, are famous pictographs. And among those pictographs, you'll find the fearsome six-fingered hand as part of that. I came across something else. It's kind of the Pawnee Indians have an account that Bill, you remember Buffalo Bill? Real name was William Cody. He wrote his autobiography in 1920. Very colorful guy. You can get his book. It's popular. But there's an interesting quote in his book by Buffalo Bill, Bill Cody, published in 1920. He says, while we were in the Sandhills scouting the Niobrara country, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp some very large bones, one of which the surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indians said the bones were those of a race of people who long ago had lived in that country. They said these people were 3 times the size of a man of the present day. And they were so swift and strong that they could run by the side of a buffalo and, taking the animal in one arm, could tear off a leg and eat it as they ran. I don't know what to make of that. It's in his autobiography. It's published in 1920. I don't think he was worried about UFOs and stuff, but it is a interesting allusion to the Indian legends. In the early country, Ashur, they always speak of the flying god of Ashur. And this diagram you see in many of the ancient monuments of a man with a bow, like Nimrod perhaps, and the wings. And you see this on the monuments. Here's an example of them. As you go through Egypt, this is a snapshot in one of the tombs of, I think it's Ramesses II, but you see in all of them, you'll notice on the headers of these passages, again you see a flying disc again and again and again as you go through Egypt. You look at the headers on many of these monuments. You look up there and you always see the flying disc, sometimes with a snake involved. And you see it again and again and again. Sometimes you see a person involved with these, and you even find the disc being transported from place to place. So this seems to be something more than simply a symbol of some icon that they're worshiping. The point I want to get across, it startled me to realize that this is not simply a study in Old Testament ancient history. It is essential to understand, if you're going to understand your Bible, understand prophecy. You need to understand there were Nephilim after the flood. In Genesis 4, it says there were Nephilim in those days, and also after that. It even hints at it right there. In Genesis 14 and 15, we discover there are 4 tribes at least, the Rephaim, the Emim, the Harim, and the Zamzumim, that Joshua was instructed to wipe out every man, woman, and child. Boy, that sounds like genocide. It was, because we had the same thing, not a flood this time, it was a local situation. And Arba, Anak, and his 7 sons, the Anakim, are talked about not just in the Bible, but also in Egypt, by the way. They were encountered in Canaan, Numbers 13:33, when the 12 spies went. When they came back, Joshua and Caleb had the good report. The other 10 guys said, hey, there's Nephilim in the land. That's the word they used. They were giants. We are like grasshoppers in their sight. That's not an exaggeration. They had reason to be terrified. Obviously, Joshua and Caleb had faith in God. We're, God's on our side, let's go. But and it's easy to disparage the other 10 guys. You need to understand they had, on the one hand, some reason to be cautious. In Deuteronomy 3 and Joshua 12, we encounter Og, the king of Bashan. He's the king of the giants, the Rephaim. Goliath, remember, he had 4 brothers. That's why David picked up 5 stones when he crossed the brook. Why? He was ready for all 5 of those guys. By the way, what does the Golan Heights, Hebron, and the Gaza Strip have in common? They're in the news day all the time, right? These are the areas that Joshua failed to exterminate the Rephaim. The word Rephaim means the dead, the walking dead. Isaiah 26:14 says they cannot be resurrected. These are strange creatures. And it's interesting, if you study the strongholds that they failed to defeat, you'll notice that those same regions are the territories, the so-called West Bank, that are in dispute today. I think that's fascinating. Not Joshua, but his descendants failed to deal with these issues, and they plague them to this very day. The Golan was called Bashan, and it's just when Jesus is hanging on the cross in Psalm 22, verse 12, he says a strange thing. He says, many bulls have compassed me, strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. I have no idea what that means, but I suspect he's not talking about cattle. I think he's talking about some kind of demon oppression that's involved. I think it's allusion to the Rephaim. Let's talk a little bit about the nature of angels, because that's really at the root of this problem. You notice we learn a lot about angels by looking at the Bible. They always appear in human form. They look human. In fact, many people entertain them unaware, as we find out. And at the resurrection and at the ascension, there's always a pair of angels. And they're like men. They look like men standing there. They spoke. They took men by the hand. They ate meals with them. They're capable of direct physical combat. The Passover in Egypt was by a death angel. In the book of 2 Kings, slaughter of the 185,000 Syrians. One angel after night slaughters 185,000 Syrians. You don't mess around with angels. Now, and they don't marry in heaven. Now that's a phrase. By the way, I'm making a contrast here with the demons of the New Testament are not like this. They apparently are powerless except to the extent they can embody some person. They're not like angels. Don't distinguish between fallen angels, the bad guys, and the demons. The demons apparently are disembodied spirits looking for embodiment. The angels don't have that problem. They apparently can materialize it. All the way through the scripture we see them that way. We do know they don't marry. Because the question everybody has is, can angels have sex? The scripture says no. No, it doesn't say that. Jesus says, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God. He's talking about that in a resurrection bodies we don't have sex because we're immortal. There is no procreation. There is no reproduction issue. And angels, he's talking here about the angels of God in heaven. I would not speculate on the technologies available to an angel who falls. And that's what we're really dealing with here. Now, there's a strange word that gets overlooked by the scholars in general, and I've participated in some translation issues on this very issue. There's a word called okaterion, and it refers to the body as the dwelling place for the spirit. It only occurs twice in the scripture, and it's very interesting where it does. It occurs in Jude 6, and it's the word that describes what the fallen angels disrobed from. And in 2 Corinthians 5:2, it speaks of, it alludes to the heavenly body that you and I as believers aspire to be clothed in. Same word, okaterion. I think it's a technical term that's overlooked by the scholars. In Jude 6 and 7, it says, when the angels which kept not their first estate left their own habitation, that word habitation is okaterion. They disrobed from the body that they were given to indulge in this mischief in Genesis 6. The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness in the judgment of that great day. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and so we went through that before. The word is okaterion. In 2 Corinthians 5, 1 and 2, Paul tells the Corinthians, for we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. And for this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. The word translated house is okaterion. That which those angels abandoned is what we aspire to, that kind of a habit, if you will. Okaterion again. Well, let's move on. The coming to cosmic deception. What's the biggest lie of all? You know, it's interesting. This all started back in Genesis 3. When God declared war on Satan, he says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and he shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. And from this verse, we get one of the messianic titles of Christ, the seed of the woman. What many people overlook, there's two seeds mentioned here. The other seed is the seed of the serpent. And so we have the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And the seed of the serpent, we find all kinds of idioms, the red dragon in Revelation 12, the coming world leader, as I sometimes call him, the false prophet in Revelation 13. These forces are still at work and behind the world powers today. Check out Daniel 10 and really understand what's going on there. All of us have studied Daniel 2 and the sequence of nations, or empires, I should say, that were re-echoed in Daniel 7, the winged lion, bear on one side, the leopard, the terrible beast, the 10 heads. Again, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome 1 and 2. We've been through that in our prophetic studies, and most people recognize the iron mixed with clay is the Roman Empire. Don't confuse that with Western Europe. The Roman Empire, part 1 and part 2. Well, we live in a world, what's going on in this world? There's a new world order. A world without borders is the concept. The end of the independent nation state. Multiculturalism is in. Check your faith at the door. We're going to all compromise. And this is all heading for a centralized socialistic government. And there are a couple of forcing functions. Every freedom-loving person considers this an anathema, except the problem is there's no way to avoid it. Nuclear proliferation is part of it. We're on the threshold right now of nuclear war because of this very issue. But there's another forcing function that nobody talks about. The possibility, ultimately, not yet, but coming, of cosmic threat of some kind. You say, Chuck, that's way out. That's fringe stuff. Really?
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Let's talk about the miry clay. You know, in Daniel's famous vision of the multi-metal image, the last phase was, of course, the iron mixed with clay, the 10 toes. What is miry clay? Miry clay is clay made from mire, or dust, if you will. And everybody talks about the clay in the 10 toes of Daniel's imagery. No one, I'm guilty too, paid any attention to Daniel's explanation of it. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 43, he's explaining the whole thing. He's interpreting the vision for you. When he gets to this, in verse 43, he says, "Whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to one another," and so on. You know, that phrase, I read that 100 times over the last 30 years and didn't hit me until this in-depth study. The miry clay refers to a they. It's a personal pronoun. They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. In order to mingle themselves with the seed of men, they have to be something other than the seed of men, or it makes no grammatical or logical sense. So the they that are going to do the mingling are not the seed of men. Oh, could this be a hint of some mischief in the end times analogous to the mischief in Genesis 6? I think so. They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Boy, there it stares. Anyway, but the coming great deception, Jesus opens and closes his Matthew 24 thing. He says, "There shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they should deceive the very elect." What's going to protect you? Your intellectual background? Your knowledge of physics? No way. No way. If it were possible, they would deceive the very elect. The only thing that can save you from this deception is your spiritual condition by being in Christ. They shall show great signs and wonders. They're going to do things that are going to violate our apparent knowledge of reality. When we get to 2 Thessalonians, Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2 has a lot to say about this. He says, "The mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now hindereth will hinder until he be taken out of the way. And then shall the wicked one be revealed, whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders." The wicked one is going to do miracles. Be prepared for some political leader to raise people from the dead. We're not ready for that. The mystery, see, I think the restrainer is restraining far more than you and I have any idea. Now, where does this wicked one come from? It surprises many to realize the Scripture tells us. In Revelation 11 and Revelation 17. Revelation 11, verse 7, "And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them." Where is this guy coming from? From out of the abuso. So he's not just some political leader that happens to be kind of gifted. No, this guy is empowered by Satan himself. And he's coming out of the abuso himself. You get to Revelation 17. "The beast that thou sawest was and is not, shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, go into perdition, and they that dwell upon the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of life." The only thing that can protect you from all of this is your position in Christ. Second Thessalonians goes on, "And because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved, for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe the lie."
But even more so, fine-tuning it to the Table of Nations. What happened at Babel was God, he disinherited the nations, and he accounted them, he allotted them to the number of the sons of God.
It's kind of similar to what the Freemasons believe. When you work your way up into Freemasonry, you believe that it's compatible with your faith. And in reality, it's really not compatible with anyone's faith. It's its own faith. But you don't know that at the lower levels. You know, it's a universalist group. You know, when you take that first initiation, you are agreeing that all paths lead to the great architect, you know, what they call God, the eye of providence. As you work your way up, I think it's the 28th degree, somewhere between the 28th and the 30th, if I remember correctly. I just had this conversation the other night with my buddy Brett, and you have this understanding that the Bible is good and it's the Word of God, but when you get to the 28th to the 30th degree, you find out that the role gets reversed, and that Lucifer was actually the underdog. He was the good God that really did all the good creation, that really did. He had the best, he had basically our best interest at heart. It's Gnosticism, and so Jesus, they believe, is the enemy. Yahweh is the enemy, that it's a reversal role, that the Bible, and this is part of the coded language that they use, is that you don't find this out until you're higher up. So It's like the reversing of roles. So even though Jesus has already died on the cross, he shed his blood on Calvary, and there's some really interesting things about his blood possibly going down to the Ark of the Covenant. Maybe another video we could talk about that. But Jesus died on Calvary. He descended into the heart of the earth, where he preached to the spirits in prison. This is all part of the Hollow Earth film we did. And then he rose. He defeated death. He rose from the dead. And he declared victory over every unclean spirit, over every imp of Satan, over every evil entity that would ever be in existence. He literally declared victory over. And their time is short. They know their time is short, yet their goal is to try to do as much damage to the kingdom as they can. But what we know, according to Scripture, is that their work is in vain, because the cross defeated all of that. Now, let me add one last little thing here. Greg Renrich was out walking on his ranch, or his farm, his property, with his wife. And all of a sudden, they get this thing on the back of their neck, and they're kind of, wiping it. You ever smash a bug or something, and you kind of do one of these? So they get a slimy residue on the back of their neck. Well, it doesn't affect him the same way it affects his wife. And this is their property. This isn't like they're out in some random wooded lot. This is their land. They get back, and they've already had a horrible history. Ever since he started speaking out about his testimony, because he's a Christian, to the best of my knowledge, he began to share these stories publicly. And he had just a SWAT team show up at his house with machine guns, destroyed his family. The family relationships that they had tight bonds with are now, they've got a broken family over all this. People can't understand why he would have done anything to put their family at risk. They're like, why would you have done this? Why would you even talk about this? You have ruined this family. And so he doesn't even have good relationships with all of his family anymore because of the high up, non-existent government, SWAT teams that are coming out to force him into submission. Anyway, that happened previously. Now, fast forward, they're walking on their land, and they get this slimy residue on the back of their neck. And so they get back home, and the wife is ill. I mean, it acted fast. So ill. Chad gave us an update. Chad contacted him, and we filmed the update in the film because we were waiting on him. We were kind of tracking along. He's not going to come on the film. His wife's not doing well. Matter of fact, Chad said in the film that he didn't know if his wife was actually going to make it through all of this. And it reminded me of the late J.C. Johnson, who was a friend of mine. He was a cryptozoologist, and he would take people on guided tours in the Four Corners area, where he would show people where these animals would show up. Like he says that they've seen pterodactyls. He says they've seen all kinds of crazy, what we could only call a hybrid or a prehistoric type. We're told that there's portals in the Four Corners where these things cross over, and the Indians don't want to go near it. And these wild animals, what we would call animals, they're these weird things that are coming through the portals. So J.C. Johnson would go out there with his, he'd take a security team with machine guns, like mercenary style, and they would give guided tours out there. People that wanted to go see this for themselves. And it was several times he would send me photos from their action cameras where they would pick up what looks like gray aliens in the bushes. Anyway, I'm bringing all this up because J.C. Johnson told me that he had friends that went down to Dulce to research. He said that they were getting a little too close to the fire. They got done doing their homework. They go back to their car. Well, what they didn't know is that before they got back to their car, there were men in black, these men in the shadows, that came and dusted some type of a biological weapon known as a transdermal on the handles of their car. So all they had to do was touch the handle. You touch it, it is now transdermal. It's going into your bloodstream immediately. And they become either really, really ill to the point where the rest of their life is spent in a bed, or they die. That's what I was reminded of when Greg Renrich, passed on the message that his wife was ill and that they had found some type of a slime on the back of their necks.
Enter the target without perception. Without perception. Without perception.
And the answer you're looking for lies right here.
I am just a figment of your imagination.